Sophia had always been captivated by the hustle and bustle of the city. As a young woman raised in wealth, her world was one of constant movement, glamorous events, dinners in lavish restaurants, and a schedule packed with meetings and obligations. She had everything one could imagine, yet she still felt a nagging emptiness inside. Everything was so fast-paced, so transactional, and for the first time in her life, she began to wonder if she was missing something more meaningful. It was on a crisp autumn evening when she first met him. The city's skyline, painted with hues of orange and purple, set the backdrop for an impromptu walk in the park. The air was cool, and the scent of wet leaves filled the atmosphere. Sophia found herself strolling along the path, her hands tucked into the pockets of her jacket, her mind drifting. That's when she saw him, a man sitting alone on a bench, eyes glued to a book, his clothes modest but clean. There was an almost magnetic pull to him. Despite his unremarkable appearance, there was something undeniably peaceful about the way he sat there, unaffected by the rush around him. Sophia couldn't help but slow her pace as she approached him, drawn to the stillness he exuded. She stood for a moment, watching him without saying a word. The rain that had begun to fall lightly only seemed to deepen the sense of quiet he carried. After a few seconds, she couldn't resist any longer. "Excuse me," she said, her voice gentle but curious. The man looked up from his book, offering a small smile, his eyes kind and welcoming. "Yes." Sophia hesitated for a moment, unsure how to start the conversation. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but how do you stay so calm in the middle of all this?" She motioned vaguely to the city around them. "I've never seen someone so at ease here." The man chuckled softly. "I think you just get used to the noise. It's there, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming." His smile widened. "Besides, if you look closely enough, there's a lot of peace to be found, even in a place like this." Sophia blinked, taken aback by his simple wisdom. "I suppose. I've never really thought about it that way." "Most people don't," he said. "They're too busy chasing something." "Something?" she asked, intrigued. He shrugged casually, his eyes twinkling with an easy confidence. "Anything. Money, status, the next big thing. But I think people forget to live in the moment. They're so focused on what they don't have, they miss what's right in front of them." Sophia sat down on the bench beside him, her curiosity piqued. She studied him for a long moment. There was nothing flashy about him. He wasn't dressed in expensive clothing, nor did he have an air of self-importance about him. But there was a peace in his presence that felt foreign to her. "So, what do you do?" she asked after a pause. "I mean, you must have some big goals or dreams, right?" "No," he said with a quiet laugh. "I don't need $1 million idea to be happy. I work at a small cafe down the street. I'm learning to make the perfect cup of coffee, and I'm reading a lot." He gestured to the book in his hands. "I guess I'm just trying to figure things out one day at a time." Sophia found herself laughing softly, feeling a sense of relief she hadn't realized she needed. "That sounds so simple." "It is," he said, eyes twinkling with warmth. "Sometimes simple is the best way to be." For the rest of the evening, they talked about everything and nothing. Sophia had never had a conversation so effortless. She was used to navigating a world full of pretensions and expectations, but with him, she felt like she could just breathe. There were no masks, no roles to play, just two people sharing their thoughts. Over the next few weeks, they began to meet regularly. They didn't go to expensive restaurants or fancy parties. Instead, they wandered through the park, talked over coffee at his cafe, and spent hours in quiet bookstores. Slowly, Sophia began to open up to him about her life, the pressure she felt from her family, and the hollow feeling she often tried to ignore. Luca, for his part, shared his world with her, one that was simple yet meaningful. His dreams were modest, but they were his, and that was something Sophia admired deeply. With him, she felt understood in a way she never had before. One evening, as the golden light of the setting sun filtered through the trees in the park, Luca took her hand gently in his. He turned to her, his face serious, yet full of warmth. "I know I don't have much," he said softly, "but I do have this." He squeezed her hand gently. "I have my heart, and it's yours if you'll take it." Sophia's heart skipped a beat, the words sinking into her like a tender promise. She had never expected to find someone like Luca, a man so grounded, so content with the little things. Yet here he was, offering her more than she could ever imagine. Tears filled her eyes as she looked into his. "I'll take it. I've already taken it." She leaned in and kissed him softly, feeling a warmth that was beyond anything she had known in her life. In the weeks and months that followed, Sophia's life began to change in subtle yet profound ways. She still had the wealth and privileges that came with her background, but they no longer defined her. Her world had expanded beyond what money could buy. She had found love in the most unexpected of places, and it was more real than anything she had ever experienced. Luca never asked her to give up her life, but with him, Sophia learned to appreciate what truly mattered. It was no longer about the grand events or the latest trends. It was about the quiet moments, the simple joy of being with someone who loved her for who she was. She'd have found the peace she had been searching for, no longer in the glittering lights of her city, but in the humble heart of a man who had nothing but love to offer. And in return, she gave him all of hers. Story number 2. Maya had always believed in love. Not the kind of love that was grand and extravagant, but the simple, quiet kind, the kind that grew over time, like the roots of a tree, unseen but sturdy. She'd seen her parents' love, calm and unwavering, and it had shaped her belief that real love wasn't flashy. It was built on trust, kindness, and shared moments. But life, as it so often does, didn't go according to her expectations. After a long-term relationship ended, Maya found herself doubting that kind of love existed anymore. She threw herself into her work as an interior designer, focusing on her career, her friends, and the occasional weekend getaway. Romance, for her, felt like a distant memory. One day, while visiting a small antique store on the edge of a city to search for vintage decor pieces, she stumbled upon a dusty old book, its leather cover worn with age, its pages yellowed. It wasn't the type of thing she usually gravitated towards, but something about it called to her. She picked it up, letting her fingers trace the title, Love Letters from the Past. Curious, Maya bought the book, telling herself it was just a little indulgence. She didn't expect much, but once she started reading, she found herself unable to stop. The book was a collection of letters exchanged between two people, written in the 1940s. It was a story of love, of longing, and of lives interrupted by war. Each letter was filled with a tenderness that Maya hadn't realized she was missing in her own life. The more she read, the more she felt drawn to the emotions in the letters, how the words of one person could touch the heart of another across time and distance. It made her wonder if such a love could still exist today. Her curiosity led her to research the authors of the letters, and to her surprise, she discovered they had lived in the same city. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unfinished about their story, something left unsaid. She wanted to know more. Maya began visiting the old house that had once belonged to one of the authors, a charming, ivy-covered cottage on the outskirts of town. It was on one of these visits that she met Daniel. He was sitting on the steps of the house, an old wooden crate in front of him, sorting through some belongings. Maya had just come to admire the house from the outside, but she paused when she saw him. There was something about the way he focused on his task, his brow furrowed, that intrigued her. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice hesitant. "I couldn't help but notice this house. Do you know anything about the people who lived here?" Daniel looked up, startled, but then his expression softened when he saw her. He stood, brushing off his hands. "It's my grandmother's house. She and her husband lived here a long time ago. I'm just going through some of their things." Something in Maya's chest fluttered at the mention of his grandmother. The letters, the connection, it all felt too coincidental. "Would you mind if I asked who they were? I recently found a book of love letters, and, well, it sounds strange, but the letters were from this area, from the 1940s. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, and he nodded. That was my grandparents. They were quite the couple. My grandmother kept everything, including their letters. He paused, a wistful smile crossing his face. I suppose I've heard the stories 1,000 times, but they still feel as though they belong to another world. Maya felt a spark of recognition in her heart. I've been reading them. The letters were beautiful. I just wanted to understand more about their love story. Daniel chuckled softly. I never thought of anyone being interested in that kind of thing, but I suppose if you want, I could show you the old letters. I've got a few tucked away. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and Maya spent time together going through old boxes of his grandparents' belongings. They talked about the letters, about life during the war, and about the lessons of love that had been passed down through the generations. There was something easy about being with him, a quiet connection that neither of them expected. Maya had come into his world searching for answers, but somewhere along the way, she found herself sharing her own heart. One afternoon, as the sunlight streamed through the windows, Daniel showed her an old photograph of his grandmother and grandfather standing together at a dance. They looked so happy, so in love, and Maya couldn't help but feel a pang of longing. Do you think that kind of love is still possible? Maya asked, her voice soft. Daniel sat beside her, his gaze lingering on the photograph before he turned to her. I think it is. Maybe not the kind you read about in books or see in movies, but the kind that grows slowly, that builds with time and trust. A love that understands your faults, your fears, but still chooses to stay. Maya's heart skipped a beat. The words felt familiar, as though they were exactly what she needed to hear. She looked into Daniel's eyes, seeing something there that mirrored her own feelings. There was no grand gesture, no fireworks, but there was something deeper, more real, in the way he spoke, in the way they had come to know each other. I think I've been looking for the wrong kind of love, Maya confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought it had to be perfect, like the stories in the books, but now I see that maybe it's just about finding someone who makes you feel like home. Daniel took her hand in his touch warm and reassuring. I think you're right, he said, his voice steady, and maybe we've been looking for the same thing. And in that moment, Maya realized that love didn't have to be something perfect or grand. It was the quiet moments, the soft words, the shared history. Love, in all its forms, had been waiting for her all along. She just had to be open to it. As the days passed, Maya and Daniel continued to uncover the story of his grandparents, and in doing so, they wrote their own love story. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was theirs.